Hi guys! Today I am going to be doing a few little alcohol ink experiments on vellum. So I decided to show you my process, even though I will, disclaimer, I am no expert at all when it comes to this. I am just basically playing around. So I have just put a plastic bag. It's one of those sort of bags that you get with an order of scrapbook.com, something like that, just slightly larger than my vellum that I'm working on, just to protect my desk. Although I will say my desk is kind of like plasticky anyway, so the alcohol inks wipe off with alcohol, so I'm not super concerned about my desktop. If you don't have that sort of desktop, then I would consider putting down way more protection than what I've got. And I've just grabbed a piece of vellum, and it's a fairly heavyweight vellum, but nothing particularly special. This is just the vellum I have in my stash that I print through my printer and use on my silhouette, so nothing particularly special. And I'm just starting by dropping a few drops of color of this alcohol inks. Got a whole different variety of colors there. I will link down below in the description box the colors that I'm using today. And I'm just dropping a few drops down and then adding a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and spreading that across my page with my hairdryer. Now my hairdryer is on a pretty low heat and a pretty low setting. It's as low as I can go. You don't want to use a high heat on vellum because it will actually melt the vellum, and especially melt the plastic bag that's underneath my vellum as well. The point of the hairdryer is just to help blow the ink and the alcohol around. So no other technique other than to just sort of move it around the way you want the direction to go. And you can see you kind of get that cloudy sort of ethereal look to it, which I really like. I didn't go too far with this one. You can keep adding ink and adding alcohol and blowing it around and getting all sorts of different layers with your alcohol inks, but for this one I just left it at the one layer, and then I grabbed some of the gold mixative and a paintbrush, and I'm just sort of splattering that across the page. It seemed to be sort of a diagonal from the bottom left to the top right. That's what drew my eye, and so I'm kind of keeping the splatters mostly in that direction, but just adding a few little ones across the page. Now I decided I quite liked that splattery look, so I let the gold dry, and then I added a little bit of the alcohol ink blending solution onto my palette, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm using my paintbrush to add some splatters, and you can see what happens when the blending solution hits the dried ink. It expands outwards and creates these sort of bubble looks. So I'm just going to carry on doing that across the page. Probably best bet is to let each layer of bubbles dry. You can see what happens when those two bubbles hit each other. They kind of mush together, but that's where I left it, and I really like the look of it. It's pretty, and I love this look on vellum, so I decided to do maybe a couple more. I wasn't finished playing with one, and once you get all of this stuff out, you might as well carry on playing with it. This time I used my vellum, put my vellum down and used the isopropyl alcohol first, sort of spread that out across my page, which did cause my vellum to kind of curl up, which makes it a little bit messier. So you can see here I'm trying to clean up a little bit as I go. The alcohol with the ink sort of slips under the vellum, which isn't a problem. You can use alcohol ink on anything really, but the point of it is that it needs to be something that it doesn't absorb into. So the alcohol in the ink that goes underneath my vellum isn't going to absorb into the paper, which means I can wipe it off afterwards. So I'm not actually super concerned that anything is slipping underneath there. I was just trying to avoid having too much go onto my desktop, so I just grabbed a tissue and wiped that up before it dried. So this time I'm using a little bit more alcohol and putting the alcohol down first before I add the ink onto it. So it's much looser and sort of flows a bit better. You can see that it goes much further, and I'm using the hair dryer as I go to dry the edges basically. So that's why I blow from one side and then the other, and that just helps to create those sort of stronger edges. And to me it looks like sort of a dyed silk, which I really loved. So I am roughly trying to create a rainbow order. It's a little bit difficult. I don't have all the colors. I've got a few colors, but I don't have all the colors. So I'm trying to create as much of a rainbow as I can, and this time I do add a few more layers onto here, and you can see what happens when you add ink on top of ink. It pushes it out, so you don't tend to get necessarily a mix of colors. They push each other out of the road. There is a little bit of staining that goes on, which means you do get a little bit of layering, but not an awful amount. Now I've decided to flip it over. I'm going to add ink on both sides of my vellum, and that's how I'm going to get some layering, because like I said, when you layer ink on top of ink, it pushes it out. You don't get those layers. But if you put a layer of alcohol ink on one side of your vellum and then let that dry, flip it over and put more ink on the other, you are going to get that layering. So you can see here when I put the yellow ink on top of on one side of the vellum that's got blue on the other, you're going to get a green effect. So this was a fun experiment. Sort of the ink that was mushing under the paper, that's what gave me the idea for this, and it actually worked out really nicely. So this is definitely something that I will play with again. It's a fun way to be able to get layers. The other way you could do layers would be to put more than one piece of vellum down. If you did this sort of technique on one piece of vellum and then did a second one, you could layer those two pieces of vellum on top of each other and create multiple sort of layered effects, which I like the idea of. So on this side, I'm basically just adding colors to try to create more of that rainbow feel. So using basic color theory, pink on top of yellow is going to get orange, yellow on top of blue is going to get green, just to get a little bit more of a rainbow feel. And I'm really happy with that one. I'm not adding any splatters or anything to that. I'm going to leave it exactly how it is. Now I'm going to sort of end up combining those two sort of techniques on this one, but I want to limit my color palette a little bit more. I'm going to try and keep to a more warmer color palette here, and I experimented with swirling the ink and the alcohol around rather than using the hairdryer. But I did find I don't really enjoy that sort of veiny effect that you get with that. So I did end up going straight back to my hairdryer. It's much stronger force, air force obviously, so it blows it around and is just a quicker process. The swirling didn't spread the ink out as much, and perhaps that might have worked a bit better if I had more ink or more alcohol, but I actually just prefer using the hairdryer. It's maybe a little bit more control. This is quite an uncontrollable process for me at the moment. I haven't got enough skill to control where the ink is going, so it is more of just an experimentation, I guess, sort of a meditation is how someone else described it, and that's how I feel like it is. This one, I really enjoyed the color mixing between the orange and the pink. The pink that I have is it does dry very purpley, very magenta, so I decided to embrace that and add a little bit of purple, which I think the name of the color is eggplant, which I really like, through the middle. So rather than sticking to just my pink and orange tones, I'm adding that tiny bit of purple through the middle, so I end up with an orange to purple sort of ombre through the center of this space here. Now I used the, what's it called? Sorry, the ink blending solution to add a few little drips onto the page here. And the alcohol that was leaking off the edge of the page was actually picking up some of these other colors that I had on my plastic bag here, and you can see how easy that is to clean up with just a little bit of alcohol on a tissue. And you can also see what I meant about being able to wipe the color off the vellum. So I ended up with a little bit of green on there, which I definitely did not want, and that's what I was wiping off before I carry on here. Now I just added a little bit more isopropyl alcohol because I wasn't loving how these sort of spots had turned out, and by the time I cleaned up, the spots were dry. This all happens super quickly. It doesn't take very long for the alcohol to dry at all, so you don't have a lot of working time. But when you don't love something, you can just wipe it away with a little bit more alcohol. So that's what I'm doing, just carrying on with layers until I get a result that I'm semi-happy with. And I'm just carrying on adding more alcohol, more ink, while I was adding the alcohol to wipe out the sort of dotty bits that did dilute a lot of the color down. So I want to add a little bit more color back in again, especially through the middle here where I wanted it to be that sort of darker purple. I will say I was trying to sort of be cheaty and hold the hairdryer in one hand and add the ink and the alcohol with my other hand, but I don't have a lot of control with my left hand there, so things did tend to go a little bit awry when I did that. It is easier to turn the hairdryer on and off, which I'm not sure how great that is for my hairdryer, and this is the actual hairdryer I use for my hair, so I want to be a tiny bit careful there too, I think. Just trying to get a little bit more of that red color, which happens when I'm mixing the orange with the pink. And again, drying off the bits that go underneath until I'm a little bit happier with it. I've got a few odd sort of splatters there, and I kind of want to embrace that. So instead of dripping the blending solution straight out of the bottle, I'm using it on my brush and just touching the vellum with the brush. You can see how quickly it spreads out, and then I dried that with the hairdryer so that those bigger dots would stay as bigger dots, and then I'm going to just add a little bit more of the same sort of dotty method but with that gold mixative. This time the gold mixative, I did add a little bit of the blending solution into it so that it did spread a little bit more. It's less of a vivid gold, and you do get that still metallic look. And after I do the biggest splatters, I am adding a few smaller splatters and then trying to let it dry in between, just so that you get those really defined circles. And once I'm happy with all of those, I can go ahead and let them dry completely and fully. It does take a little bit of drying time, especially on that double-sided one or anywhere where there is a large concentration of colors. But I ended up with 3 really pretty pieces that I love and I'm going to use in my next video. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you want to keep watching, there are a couple more videos on screen, or why not check out my Patreon page? There are even more videos over there. Otherwise, I'll see you again really soon. Bye!